everyone. I'm Carrie Slattery, Chief Advancement Officer of the Cummer Museum Art and Gardens. Welcome to our second season of LiterArture series, Coping with COVID. Tonight's presentation is running for cover. I have the pleasure to introduce this dynamic duo, Stacey Goldring and Cindy Edelman. And many of you know them from last year's series, which was so well attended, and due to popular demand and actually rave reviews we received, we asked them to do 4 more for us this year. They, of course, came up with the most appropriate subjects given our time. I want to give you a little bit of background on both of them, and it's pretty extensive, so I've had to summarize a little bit. Cindy is an active community volunteer and the former chair of the Community Foundation, Northeast Florida, the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, known as JPEF, having served on the boards of the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens, Leadership Jacksonville, and Youth Leadership Jacksonville. She was an EVE Award winner and recipient for volunteer service in 2015, one Jack's Gold Medallion recipient, the past president of Congregation, I'm going to say it wrong, Cindy, Asava Chavez, right? My New York, thank you. My New York stuff should come back in there. And a founding member of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Cindy is a retired art history instructor. She taught at Bowles and Florida State College in Jacksonville, received her BA from Vanderbilt and her MAT from JU. And I hope you don't mind me reading everyone, but they have such extensive background. So I have to look so I don't miss anything. Stacey Goldring, as you will see, she's a writer and a filmmaker, as many of you know her in Jacksonville, is a founder of Searching for Identity. That's a nonprofit organization offering dynamic arts. And I think that, like I said, many of you in the series know Stacey from her work in town. Her documentary and theater work focus on American immigrant resilience. And she's a resilience in the Holocaust survivorship inheritance, which they're going to do a series on the Holocaust. I hope none of you miss. Honestly, it's going to be excellent. Gosh, it was tough cutting it down for you two, I'm telling you. It went on for pages. A guest lecturer at the University of Florida. She's co-taught a STEM honors course examining Holocaust remembrance. In 2007, Stacey began chapter EndNotes book discussions. And today you can tune in and listen to her book reviews on NPR, our own NPR WJCT 89.9, and her book on Wooden Wheels, a survivor's memoir of hiding the Dutch countryside, was published in 2005. Stacey is a graduate and has a BA in journalism from Ohio State University, and she spent 6 years as a newspaper reporter in South Florida. I'd love to hear stories about that one day, Stacey. Before I turn it over to Cindy and Stacey, I'd love to remind you that if you sign up for the series, which is 4, first one tonight, Cindy and Stacey have agreed to host an engaging evening of conversation over a cocktail in our beautiful gardens. To find out more information on the series, we're going to have something on the slide, but also tomorrow you'll be sent a survey, a short survey, and also have all the series listed with the links so you can register very quickly. So let me turn it over to what we've all been waiting for tonight, to our wonderful, wonderful speakers, Cindy and Stacey.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks, Carrie. Good evening, and welcome to the first of the 4 LiterArture presentations. Some of you may not know what our series is all about. Well, 4 years ago, Stacey and I met at the San Marcos Starbucks, bemoaning the lack of civil discourse in our world. We asked ourselves, well, what could we do about it? How could we impact change in our own community? One thing we knew for certain was that as Americans, we share commonalities in our art and our literature. And that's when we decided to expand the idea of presenting, pairing books and art, because that was something that we both knew and we enjoyed doing it separately. So we decided to take a stab at doing it together. And we put together numerous programs that remind us that we are all more alike than we are different. And along the way, we've celebrated diverse books and diverse artists. And we would like to thank the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens for supporting our mission, and for all of you who are Zooming in tonight. And I'm assuming you can see me. I can't see Stacey, so I hope I can see you.
You're not missing anything. Just worry. Carry on.
Okay. In case you were wondering how Stacey and I came up with our literature series theme for the year, well, it wasn't that difficult. It's as simple as we both love nothing better than escaping reality. It's a way of maintaining our sanity and our good humor throughout this past year. Don't ask our husbands anything about that, though, please. So, how did coping with COVID win out amidst all the other ideas? Easy, by turning to our mutual passions of 18th and 19th century British art and literature, reinforced with copious amounts of alcohol. And indeed, they were very pleasing and comforting. Tonight's topic, running for cover, may seem like an oxymoron since we've apparently gone over to the dark side, but we actually had a lot of fun with Frankenstein and Fuseli and perfectly at ease with them. Dread and dreams, light and darkness, cautionary tale and awakening of the unconscious, beauty and two beasts, rage and retribution, unrequited love and love gone amok. How are those descriptions relevant to our lives today? And how does a book, Frankenstein, and a painting, The Nightmare, each produced over 200 years ago, provide answers to the times we're experiencing right now? What are the lessons to be learned from closer examination? And how does studying them reveal our commonalities and, more importantly, keep us sane? That's what tonight's topics will explore. Okay, next. Thank you. Living through political revolutions and radical aesthetic movements, Henry Fuseli, and we have to get something out of the way right at the beginning here. I pronounce the name Fuseli as I've been saying it, Fuseli, like muesli, the Swiss cereal, and he is Swiss. Some people, however, say it Fuseli. And, it's like that Cole Porter song regarding tomato and tomato and potato. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just explaining to you why I call it Fuseli. Fuseli, born in 1741 and lived to 1825, created a pictorial language and a sensibility all his own. His works are inimitable. And they're symbolized by these anatomical and gestural and psychological extremes. He was an unorthodox personality, and he exaggerated, and he was histrionic, and his paintings and his drawings embraced literary and dramatic historical subjects that were intended to kind of elicit emotional responses, and including the one you see on the screen, this brooding self-portrait of a man in his 40s, a man known for a very strange behavior. Don't worry, we'll get to that, some of that later. He had a witty personality, and he had a tendency to defy convention. He looks directly at us with a kind of a sad, melancholy expression, unsure of himself, perhaps, with these kind of clenched fists, emphasizing the hands, which of course are the tools of the artist, and the eyes that really just seem to burn a hole in the paper on which it was drawn in chalk. And it reminds me, and it may remind some of you, that he was maybe channeling early Rembrandt, because there are a lot of those kind of same very intense, direct self-portraits. And the artist was born in Switzerland, as I mentioned. He grew up in Zurich, and he was the son of an artist. And his father was a rather strict personality who forced Henry to attend a classical education as a path toward the ministry in the Swiss Evangelical Reformed Church. But our man Henry preferred the bohemian life to the priesthood. Moving to London in his early 20s, he became a book illustrator and a translator. And he managed to come to the attention of none other than Sir Joshua Reynolds, which was pretty lucky if you think about it. Sir Joshua Reynolds was, the leading British portrait artist along with Gainsborough during the late 18th century. And he also was the first president of the British Royal Academy. And we're going to talk about the Royal Academy in a few seconds, maybe a minute. Next, please. So Fuseli fled to Rome on the advice of Sir Joshua Reynolds. And Rome was really the center, at that time, Rome was the center of the art world. That's where you would go and study, ancient Roman sculpture and architecture and Renaissance and the Renaissance. And so he went there for 8 years, where he acquired the reputation of a, quote, studied eccentric. And a friend noted this, he is everything in extremes, always an original. His look is lightning, his word a thunderstorm, his jest is death, his revenge hell. He cannot draw a single mean breath, and he never draws portraits. His features are all true, yet at the same time, caricature. So Rome is also where Fuseli fell deeply in love with Michelangelo, even emulating him, lying on his back, gazing up at the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And here are a couple of gals he noticed from the side of the ceiling. And these two are known as Sibyls. And Sibyls were Greek women from classical antiquity who were endowed with the gift of prophecy. And in this particular context, they were supposed to have predicted a savior's birth. And they're purposefully enlarged to be seen from below. And they're actually on the curve of the Sistine ceiling. But Fuseli must have been struck by the power and authority of their figures, including the sculptural quality of their bodies and their massive limbs. The Delphic Sibyl is on the left and the Cumaean Sibyl is on the right. And don't you think they would make good prospects for the Jaguars? Really, I think we could use a few players of their substance and their bulk, especially the Cumaean Sibyl. Next, please. Fuseli, whose portrait you see on the left on the screen, also rendered the most dramatic scenes of Shakespeare, in this case, the three witches from Macbeth. And notice how much Fuseli absorbed Michelangelo's brilliance as the trio of witches' faces resemble the Cumaean Sibyl in terms of their dramatic bodies, their gestures, their poses. And see how their spindly fingers are pointing at the windswept head of the artist in the next slide there. Like the Sibyls, the witches are way more masculine than feminine. And I added the portrait to give you this sense of the romantic, this sense of drama and feeling. Okay, next. Mostly self-taught, Fuseli returned to London, where in time he was elected to join the British Royal Academy. And that was a big deal for an artist because the Royal Academy, which had just been established in the late 1760s, was a portal for an artist to gain patronage. And it was a system of training as well. There was an art school connected to the Royal Academy. And of course, every summer there were important exhibitions. And you're looking at an 1821 engraving of a Royal Academy summer exhibition, where students and faculty and famous and up and coming artists would display their works in floor to ceiling, wall to wall shows, which would be critiqued by these senior Royal Academy professors and artists. And of course, the public was invited in to give their 2 cents. Fuseli's painting The Nightmare was first exhibited at such an event. By the way, the Royal Academy is still alive and well and continues its many exhibitions. And I just thought this was such a lively slide and gives you a sense. I tried to find the one where the nightmare, but alas, I could not. Right.
Cindy,
Yes.
all the pictures, that everyone's looking at, all the paintings, are those based on real paintings? Or
Yeah.
they-
Oh, this I don't know if this was based on a real painting. There are paintings of exhibitions, but I don't know whether this was or not, Stacey. Okay, good question.
Thank you.
Okay, next. Now, Fuseli was an early proponent of Romanticism, and that's an important term. And it was a movement in the 19th century in art and literature, and it focused on new interest in human psychology, on personal feeling, and the natural world. And his works form an anthology of romantic themes. And the nightmare that you see on the screen is his most famous painting. And we'll discover its charms momentarily. And speaking of charms, Fuseli was one of the first artists in art history to delve into dreams. And he often linked fear and sex, which are communicated through dreams. He made hundreds of drawings of erotica, which his long-suffering wife, think about Madame Cezanne, they always say she's long-suffering. I would bet that Madame Mrs. Fuseli was also long-suffering. He made hundreds of drawings of erotica, which his long-suffering wife destroyed in her oven after his death. Presumably, she was a subject in many of them and didn't want them around for history to be discussing them at any old art talk. Now, you may be fascinated, as I was, to learn that Fuseli belonged to a radical political circle of intellectuals that included political philosopher and journalist William Godwin and fellow radical early feminist author Mary Wollstonecraft. I think I need you to change to the slide with Mary. Oh, there we go. Thank you. And you see Mary, a portrait of Mary Wollstonecraft on the right. And then Mary Wollstonecraft has been in the news a lot lately, as recently as last Sunday's New York Times, due to the infamous sculpture that you see on the left that appeared in a London park last year, which has been brutally criticized. Intended to commemorate her contributions to feminism, it isn't a sculpture of her per se. I mean, surely she's spinning in her grave rather, but instead one representing an idea of her or of women in general. In all candor, Mary Wollstonecraft was a rarity of rarities, an important female public intellectual who had the temerity to argue for men and women to be educated together as equals. Mary Wollstonecraft was a woman ahead of her time, and she and Fuseli had an unusual friendship that was fraught with contradictions. So can we go to the next? Thank you. Now we're looking at the three protagonists in our story. Henry Fuseli, the artist, and then William and Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, I don't want to turn our art conversation into an Us magazine expose. Maybe some of you would probably enjoy that. But suffice it to say, Fuseli and Mary Wollstonecraft enjoyed a very special relationship. She admired him. She met him in the late 1780s. She invited him to travel with her. This was before she married Godwin, by the way. She invited him to go to France to check out the revolution. And we know, for example, that they were prodigious letter writers. And let's just say this, that things got hot, very hot, literally and figuratively. But here's what matters, though, to our story. William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft are the parents of the author of Frankenstein, our Mary Shelley, who Stacey will give a lot more details about later. And Mary Wollstonecraft died after giving birth to Mary Shelley. And so it's so tragic. Their story is such a tragic one. Okay, next. Here we go. Now let's look closely at The Nightmare, Fuseli's work of iconic Gothic horror, painted in 1781 and lives at the Detroit Institute of Art. Now, we're going to look closely at it. It's not an easy work to describe. As you can tell, it's rather dark. But before we unpack it, it's important to note that the impetus for the scene came straight from Fuseli's fertile, sexually charged imagination. And at the time, it was considered completely unorthodox due to the fact that it had no art historical precedents, no literary references, no Bible story, no history theme, therefore no obvious source and no clear meaning. And it was just confounding to everyone who saw it. And by the way, I'm really missing you, Stacey, being at the Cummer, where I know you'd have a thing or two to say about this painting. And if we were all together, it's so strange giving a talk without seeing all the people. But if we were together, I would ask someone in the audience to describe the painting for us. But since that's not the case, and since I'm not going to put you on the spot, my dear friend.
Oh, I will describe. Because the first time I saw this, I thought of this super duper scary show on Apple TV called The Serpent. I'm not the serpent, The Servant. And every time you put it on at the beginning, it is so dark that even if you turn off all the lights, you're like, what, who produced it? Who's the director? So I'm convinced that the producer, director, who's ever in charge of those things has seen the creepiness and the scariness of this style, because I'm telling you, just don't even watch the whole thing because it is so scary.
Don't worry.
It's the same colors. It's the dark reds, the dark blacks, etc. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're in this space, interior space, and we've already said that it was dark and very dramatic. It's a fashionable contemporary interior. You've got those heavy, very heavy black curtains, and they're velvet. And there is a high contrast of light and dark, and a wonderful Italian term called chiaroscuro, which literally means light dark. And so it's so exaggerated, usually exaggerates the chiaroscuro so that he uses the contrast to heighten the drama as well as the uncertainty. And you see that there's this settee or this bed or this chaise and the red drapery is also falling off the bed, resting on a footstool. On the left side of the canvas, we see a small table. It's round by the bed. And what's on it? Well, there's a mirror and a file, which would have maybe contained some sleep aids or medication, as well as a book and a cosmetic jar. Well, what else is going on here? We see this supine woman who is, on her back with full figured, with the head of these blonde curls, bathed in bright in light with the white gown, and her bright gown clings tightly to her body, exposing her voluptuous breast and also her Michelangelesque, and believe me, that is a word, sculptural legs. She's draped over the bed. Her arms are splayed. One is just hanging down limp and the other bent. And I didn't really have time tonight to show you another example of art that Fuseli used that he would have seen in Rome, and it's called the Vatican Ariadne, and she's a large sculpture that is, she's a big cup of water, as my late father would have said, a big drink of water, just like this woman is, just like the Sibyls are. And
Cindy, I have to interrupt you. You laid an Easter egg. Remember I was telling you what Easter eggs are? They're like little heads up. So Ariadne makes an appearance when we talk about this book in May.
You're getting ahead of yourself, Stacey Goldring.
I know, but I'm just so excited because I just told you what that was and then you did it. Mazel tov, you laid an Easter egg.
I'm glad that's the only thing. Okay. So I was going to mention her neck. I mean, her neck is just so, long and exposed. I feel like a vampire is going to come in any moment and just, do something horrible to her. Her provocative position evokes her vulnerability, and it contrasts with the innocence of the gown. So you've got a lot of this light dark, going on. And she seems lifeless. The contemporaries at the Royal Academy who would have seen her would have read her body language as one that presupposed nightmares, which is really fascinating to think that they would have already had the visual clue in their brains. Now, who or what is that crouching creature with the cold, malevolent eyes, the pointy ears, and the flared nostrils? What's he doing? He's staring at us. He's like basically crushing her womb and disturbing her sleep. Well, he is known as an incubus. If you read Harry Potter, like I did many years ago, you should know what an incubus is. Incubus comes from the Latin root to lie down on, and boy, he's crushing her like nobody's business. Now, the incubus is a creature right out of Scandinavian and Germanic folklore casting, not central casting, but Scandinavian and Germanic folklore casting. And the incubus represents a spirit, or it's called a mara, M-A-R-A. And a mara was a creature that was sent to disturb sleepers with bad dreams. And by the way, for your information here, this definition was in Samuel Johnson's 1755 dictionary. And I want to share what Samuel Johnson, how it was described. A mare or mara is a spirit that in heathen mythology was related to torment or to suffocate sleepers, a morbid oppression in the night, resembling the pressure of weight on the breast. So not only is he a mythological figure, but he's a sexual predator who preys on innocent sleeping women. And if that were not enough, there's that horse whose oblong head seems to kind of pop out from behind the red curtain. A vision, and you use that word, Stacey, but that's what I think too. It's just real creepiness. Notice his eyes are just bulging out of his head, and instead of pupils, Fuseli has painted these milky orbs, which indicate blindness. Now, the horse was not present in the earliest preparatory drawings of this painting. Scholars see him as an afterthought, perhaps symbolizing the sex act. And just in case you're thinking that the horse is the mare in the name of the painting, the etymology of the word nightmare in this context does not relate to horses. It comes from the now obsolete definition of the term mara, or spirit sent to torment sleepers. So let me say that again. The etymology of the word nightmare does not relate to horses, but rather mara or mara, the spirit sent to torment sleepers. Now, the horse could also be viewed as a visual pun on the word nightmare, or it could also refer to an uncomfortable reference to folklore. Either way, it kind of contributes, and not kind of, it definitely contributes to its Gothic tone, conjuring up monsters and midnight rides. Needless to say, the nightmare put Fuseli on the map. Even though the majority of the public were appalled by the painting, Fuseli's popularity soared, and he made a second version of the work and many prints, and we need to move to the many prints. And to this day, it's been parodied and satirized. And I thought for sure I could find a Bernie meme or a Ted Cruz meme with this painting, but unfortunately, I haven't been able to find either. And critics lost their mind. One said this was a nightmare on the breast of British art. And another said, the nightmare by Mr. Fuseli, like all his productions, has strong marks of genius about it, but hag writing is too unpleasant a thought to be agreeable to anyone, and it's unfit for furniture or reflection. There were rumors that Fuseli had used opium or that he had consumed raw pork. That was so distasteful. And he didn't give many clues to the meaning of the painting, except this. he said, one of the most unexplored regions of art are dreams. And he went on to paint many other types of dreams and scenes of violence, sexual passion, perversion, domination, and submission, and continued to exploit dreams in his art. He would have definitely made a great patient for Sigmund Freud for all those reasons. Now, Stacey, I'm noticing my time is.
Don't worry about it. I'm listening.
I'm gonna stop at maybe this one, or maybe then I have several others, but I think let me just get through this and then we'll see where we are. Okay, there are iconic works, and this is what's different about not being together at the Cummer.
We can't kick one another.
Yeah, we can't kick one another. These are there are some iconic works in art history that are similar to the Nightmare in the sense that we can discuss all kinds of speculation about what they mean, but we're left at the end of the discussions with ambiguity. I mean, think about Titian's Venus of Urbino, or think about Las Meninas by Velázquez, or think about Manet's Bar at the Folies Bergère. I mean, you know, they're great to talk about, but we never know. We don't know for sure what the actual meaning is. So because the Nightmare is suggestive but not explicit, we're left with all kinds of theories as to what it means. You know, whose nightmare is it? Is her pose provocative? Is it innocent? Is she satisfied? And one of the major, perhaps the major theme to unlocking the purpose of this work involves a 20th century discovery. And it reads like a CSI episode. In 1955, the painting reached Detroit, and conservators found that the back side of the painting, and that's what you're looking at on the left side of the screen here, the back side of the painting had been covered by a piece of canvas. And once it was removed, they uncovered it and they found an unfinished portrait of a beautiful young woman whose identity has been attributed to the very lovely Anna Landolt, who was a niece of a friend of Fuseli. And it appears that our painter had felt a great deal of desire for the darling Anna, if only that ardor had been returned. And alas, a major dose of unrequited love is a tough lesson for anyone to swallow. And I just want to share this letter that Fuseli wrote about her, describing a dream. So he's writing a letter to his friend, the uncle of this beautiful woman, about a dream he had, and it's some dream. Last night, I had her in bed with me, tossed my bedclothes, hugger, mugger, wound my hot and tight clasped hands about her, fused her body and soul together with my own, poured into her my spirit, breath, and strength. And anyone who touches her now commits adultery and incest. She is mine and I am hers, and have her I will. And so the Nightmare has been advanced, the theory has been advanced by no less than H.W. Jansen, the great art historian, that it's a projection of his unrequited love for Anna, because he flipped the canvas and painted the Nightmare on the other side, which is really quite unusual. Usually artists just paint over if they, dislike something, or if they want to change it up. And so you see how Stacey flipped the painting for me. She's so handy with her technical skills. And you see the woman in the painting, and the Nightmare now looks like a Rolls-Royce ornamental hood icon. But suffice it to say that Jansen identified Anna as the female sleeper and Fuseli as the demon, whose face actually resembles the painter. And he suggests that the visit of the incubus was an effort to prevent Anna's wedding night with another. And think about it. If you're familiar with Frankenstein, isn't that what the monster is doing to Victor? So there are many other interpretations, and I'm thinking that I need to stop. But I would like to just go to the next slide, Stacey, and just show them that someone no less than the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, kept a copy of the work, The Nightmare, in his Vienna home/office, which was, certainly he was influenced by dreams and the unconscious. And, 20th century artists, surrealists, were also very influenced by Fuseli. And then if we just briefly, I would say that Mary Shelley too was influenced by the painting. She knew Fuseli. She met him as a teen. She wanted to recover her mother's love letters, which the Fuseli family refused to release. And it really was, along with her very troubled psyche that was damaged from growing up without her mother, not knowing her mother, and then blaming Fuseli for ruining her mother's literary reputation. Eventually, her grandson bought the letters and burned them because they thought they were incriminating. So I would like to just close by saying that returning to a work of art like The Nightmare reminds us of our vulnerabilities, our dreams, our anxieties, and our night terrors. And that's something as a country we have navigated some scary times in the last year and often felt surreal and out of control, and certainly times that are full of dread, all feelings that are evoked by the painting. And an enduring image of sexual terror, The Nightmare inspired the likes of Mary Shelley and her famous monster. And here to enlighten us on the novel is the master storyteller, Stacey Goldring.
Thank you, Cindy. That was fabulous.
Well, thank you. I went too long, I'm afraid.
Oh, no worries, mate. No worries at all. Okay. Thank you, Cindy, for painting that beautiful tableau for us so we understand the context and where Fuseli fits into Mary Shelley's life. But I want to rewind back just a few years and go back and revisit the Greek myth of Prometheus. Now, Prometheus is the Titan god of fire, and his name means foresight. Zeus charged Prometheus with forming the first humans in the image of the gods. With one rule, humans were to remain mortal. But Prometheus took umbrage, and he defied this godly edict, creating humans and bestowing the gift of fire to all humanity. His gift allowed humankind to harness nature for its own benefit and dominate the world. We all see how that turned out. Anyways, Zeus was furious, but Prometheus was stubborn, and he had an ego that was coupled with no regrets. His defiance he wore as a badge of honor. Well, that response did not go very well with Zeus. So Prometheus was sentenced to a torturous punishment. He was bound to a rock, and every single day, an eagle would come and gouge out his liver. And then every night, Prometheus' liver regenerated only to be eaten again the next day. And somewhere on some rock, evidently this is still happening. So what are the lessons of this story? Well, first of all, our livers are very ambitious things. But why would I share this with you? We're supposed to be talking about Frankenstein, but just stay with me. We all bring our own baggage to every book we read and every story we write. Leaving ancient Greece and flying forward to the early 1800s, and this story of Prometheus theme was all the rage. Visit any bookshop and you'd find a copy of this popular book, Prometheus Unbound, by the Romantic author Percy Bysshe Shelley. It was a lyrical drama, which means it was to be played out in the imagination, not necessarily the stage, which was very romantic. Percy Shelley's interpretation cast our protagonist Prometheus as a hero, this great god, a spreader of empathy and knowledge throughout civilization. He is seen as advocate and author of the human arts and the sciences, more like this kind of guy. Now, his wife, Mary Shelley, had a very different takeaway. Through her lens, Prometheus was a myth of warning to all mankind. Inspired by its themes of creation, responsibility, and ambition, and then infused with her own life's experiences, Mary invents the most powerful, scary, influential horror story of all time. Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, that is the full title, has offered Cindy and me great solace because it gives context in which to process our present turbulent craziness. So as we unpack Frankenstein, Mary's life, and the book's relevancy, ask yourself this: what price is ambition worth to you? What are the moral implications of innovation, technology, and power? And finally, what happens when responsibility is abandoned? Frankenstein is a perfect example of how literature and art stand firmly as braces of our collective bridge of understanding one another. Okay, so first a little FYI. Frankenstein was the name of the creator, the scientist, not the monster. Some people actually think there's a Frank and a Stein. Frankenstein is actually a common German name. The Franks derived from a tribe settled in Germany a long time ago, and a Stein is a stone or a place or a land, so very, very common name. This book that we'll be discussing is the first of its kind sci-fi gothic horror. So move over, Poe, because Mary Shelley penned this first. And when Frankenstein was published, you have to realize that the Gothic novel was new and not exactly respected. Today, we see Jane Eyre and Rebecca, The Raven, it's literary. But respect for this genre took time. Frankenstein was more of a Jodi Picoult than a Julian Barnes. So if you had not chosen to run for cover with Cindy and me, these are the images that probably popped into your mind. But they pose a problem. As we know in popular culture, these images, they actually usurp the work's true significance. The monster imagery has taken possession of its vital message. It's been hijacked and smothered of original intent and identity. So contrary to the popular cliche, I am going to ask you to judge this book by its cover. So the story goes like this. Meet a pleasant young man of means, our Victor Frankenstein. He comes from a close-knit family, very comfortable, idyllic childhood, loving parents, all bound together by the endless affection of the loving goddess-like Mama Frankenstein. Even the servants are adored. This Victor is the prodigal son with inquisitive mind. Now, his dad has a great library filled with wonderful literature and also some nutty old books on alchemy. Victor falls headfirst into these archaic texts, his mind swirling with these Hogwarts-like potions and conspiratorial concoctive possibilities. And meanwhile, he's also in love with his cousin Elizabeth. All seems to be going quite well. But as storytelling goes, our hero, our favorite son, needs a tragedy. So like Bambi, his mother dies. And the family grieves. Think Mrs. Ellen O'Hara and our Scarlet level grieving. Right? That was a horrible scene. But the resilient Frankenstein family, scarred with sadness, is also determined to carry on. So off to university to study science, the shining boy Victor goes, his heart still broken by his mother's death, yet betrothed to his beloved. And that's where Victor begins to lose it. Imagine this freshman. He's sitting there in his 18th century organic chem class, and he's hearing the professor and he's thinking, wait a minute, this scientific discovery stuff, it doesn't sound right. What he reads in his university textbooks crudely collide with Victor's already digested and decided version of the world. He has already lost his mother, and now he will not lose his alchemic understanding of his world. Spoiled as a child, he denies that everything he learned from his father's obsolete tomes is wrong. Victor begins to believe that he, despite science, can create life from death. Professors shun his hocus pocus, but this guy cannot pick up on any social cues. Fueled by pure, stubborn, white-hot ambition, he becomes a young man possessed, isolated, alone, delusional, and very busy. This guy forgets to check in. He doesn't check in with his family, his friends, no phone calls, no emails, no texts, no letters with wax seals. He is bent on one thing only, and that is his hypothesis. So like anyone who decides to pick and choose from logic just to suit their narrative, Victor follows the practices of legitimate medical students. In the dead of night, he steals into a cemetery to rob a grave of the recently departed. Also borrowing from the new science of electricity, he galvanizes his creature into being, which interestingly is never called a monster in the 1818 edition. Maniacal Victor, determined, fueled by his own narcissism, is an inventor, an innovator, a god. And it's worth noting in this lobby card and in the film Frankenstein, one of the coils that we see here on this movie set was designed by Nikola Tesla. Unlike a new parent who gazes lovingly at their newborn, our Victor is repulsed. Quote, "I'm unable to endure the aspect of the being," unquote. So he bolts from his dorm/laboratory. And then a gerbil wheel chase ensues, akin to Prometheus' regenerative liver, this entropic cycle of pursuit, abandonment. The creature chases Victor, or even going deeper, like Cindy said, thanks to Dr. Freud, Victor embarks on a perpetual psychoanalysis of his own doppelganger identity. Now, don't be judgmental. Victor does what we've all done. If we ignore a problem, maybe it'll go away. But we all know that rarely works out. The rejected, miserable creature, abandoned by his father, is heartbroken. For a monster, he's very sophisticated. He's empathetic. He's even a vegetarian and quite literary. He reads Milton. He likens himself to a fallen Satan and a banished Adam. But we don't have time for that right now. Anyway, so a Faustian deal is struck between the creature and Victor. Our monster says, okay, I will leave you alone forever, but you need to make me a Mrs. Monster. No one wants to be alone. He doesn't want a Mrs. Frankenstein. This is a great misconception because you've probably heard of the Bride of Frankenstein. In our book, we do get a Frankenstein fiancé, but really, would you want that name embroidered on your cocktail napkins? Victor is not a man of his word. What follows is a slow burn of a monster murdering everything precious to Victor. The monster, who maybe should have been a trial lawyer, offers Victor chance after chance after chance to make good on his word, keep his promise. But the syncopated murders of everyone Victor holds dear is unleashed. Each murder is entered as exculpatory evidence of Victor's inability to take responsibility for what he has created. What happens next to Victor? What happens next to the creature? I won't tell you, but maybe you should think twice about naming someone Victor. So why read this story? Why run for cover? Why read a book that is so sad, particularly now? I'm a team player, and when I believe in the rules, I will play by them. So I find comfort in these cautionary tales. This book is exactly that, a lesson of what happens when you're not responsible. And Mary Shelley tells us results that are truly terrifying. This was the third time I've read this book, but the ridiculously fabulous writer she still made me feel dread. So here's the question. Who would come up with such a tale? An 18-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley would. So why would she? Because good writers write about what they know. Born in London, 1797, little Mary Godwin was actually expected to be a little William, as expressed in letters exchanged between her parents prior to her birth. So Mary saw herself as a disappointing creature from the very start. Tragically, her mother died 10 or 11 days after Mary was born. She is denied a mother's love that she forever seeks. Well, then, after the death, the ladies with the casseroles start arriving at the Godwins' front door, and then a neighbor becomes Mary's stepmother. And in 1803, just before Mary's 6th birthday, the new Mrs. Godwin presented her husband with the expected son, the little William. As Cindy shared, from birth, Mary lived a life surrounded by powerful and intellectual figures. Her father, today we'd call him an influencer, or perhaps an agitator, who advanced, among other things, atheism, anarchy, and the abolishment of marriage. I guess he liked the A's. Ayn Rand probably would have liked him a lot. Fuseli's painting and his relationship with Mary's mother, and Mary's lack of having her mother present in her life, surely impacted her work. Growing up, because of her parents' prominence, the young girl was able to develop her growing intellect in the company of intellectuals and luminaries. Her education was rich yet informal. Remember, she's a female. She learned from listening to others while being invisible. A voracious reader, like Victor, she devoured the books packing the wall of her father's library. In July 1814, at age 16, Mary became involved with one of her father's disciples, the already married 22-year-old poet Percy Shelley. Now, her father couldn't outright reject this union, as Shelley and his daughter were practicing Godwin's own beliefs about free love. Mary pledged to love Percy at her mother's grave, hoping to revive, conjure, or resurrect the short-lived union between her two parents. Now, a PS, during the 1800s, people felt the deceased to be much more a part of their lives. Read the Bardo. That'll really influence what I'm saying. So making this pledge in a cemetery is not macabre, as many would interpret. If you join us next month, we will again meet in a cemetery at the headstone of a beloved mother. This is a theme. Anyway, after the love has been pledged off to the continent, Percy, Mary, and Mary's half-sister, Claire Claremont, go to travel. Please remember, Percy is already married. Upon their return, it will come as no surprise that Mary was pregnant. Clearly, Claire wasn't the best chaperone. The couple was ostracized and racked with debt. And sadly, a female child was born and only lived 3 days. But Mary's want of resurrection stayed with her forever. Context is always insightful. So just a brief message now from Literature's Weather Desk. In 1815, a volcanic eruption occurred at Mount Tambora in Indonesia, the largest of the 19th century. Its effects were felt around the world, plunging temperatures, killing thousands, instigating disease and famine. See, I really edited that, didn't I, Cindy?
You did a nice job. You did a nice job.
There's so much more I'm not allowed to say. Okay. So in 1816, it came to be known as the Year Without Sun. This global event influenced writers and artists as well, as you can see by the Turner painting on the left. Now imagine if Bravo had a show called Real Literary Radicals of 1816, Geneva No Sun. It would be here in the castle that you see, this beautiful villa overlooking Lake Geneva in Switzerland, that we find our cast of characters. On vacation, yet again, we have Mary and Percy Shelley, Mary's not so great half sister chaperone, who was crushing hard on cast member number 4, Lord Byron, along with this vampire writer and supporting cast member John William Polidori. They all go on holiday. But the weather was dark, cold, and stormy, the direct effect of the volcanic eruption. And it is in these conditions that the group decide they're not going to binge on Netflix. They're going to have a writing contest. Who can write the best ghost story? And this is where Mary Shelley has the vision of bringing the dead back to life. Mary's story pulses from the pages, reaching out from over 200 years ago, grabbing us right here today with its suspense and fear, begging us to curb our ego and cautiously execute power. Mary recalls her vision as a waking dream. Quote, I saw with shut eyes, but acute mental vision, the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then on the working of some powerful engine shows signs of life, unquote. And thus Frankenstein's monster is born, published 2 years later, anonymously. And then of course, people thought Percy wrote it. Now I can't do due diligence to Mary's bio, so I'm gonna wrap it up with the Twitter-esque summary, #dark. It truly was the year of no sun. That same year, her half-sister, Fanny Imlay, commits suicide. Then Shelley's estranged wife is found dead, drowned in the Serpentine. Mary and Percy, in debt, end this horrible year getting married to placate her father, whose view on marriage has become a bit more conservative. So in the years that followed, the couple would have 3 more children, of which only the last would survive into adulthood. She even named the first son who died William after her father as a way to atone for her very own identity, birth, and gender. To add more pain to this dark biography, it is said that Percy showed no remorse at the loss of these children. Darkness follows Mary. In 1822, her husband Percy drowns. How does Mary cope? By expressing her psychological fears and insecurities, a la the written word. She works. She returns to England with her son. She oversees the publishing of her late husband's writings. She writes novels. She republishes a more gruesome version of Frankenstein in 1832 because she needed the money. She writes travelogues, very popular, and political works. And then in 1851, after several years of illness, Mary dies at age 53. We have to push aside the campy Frankenstein images in our head to find the real Mary Shelley. And it wasn't until after this, quote, phantasmagoria of the nursery, unquote, became popular on the stage 5 years later, that Mary was actually able to publish the book on her own in 1823. On top of the limited freedom women had in the 1800s, I reckon Mary had something which many powerful women can identify: imposter syndrome. Maybe we should call it monster imposter syndrome for her. Her feelings of inadequacy as a daughter, mother, and writer are expressed in the 32 preface. It is in these introductory pages she owes the success of Frankenstein, not to her talent as an excellent storyteller, but just as someone with a vivid imagination. And the self-deprecation gets uglier. Right there in black and white, she implies her own book is a monster. Quote, and now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny go forth and prosper, unquote. Mary identifies as Victor, the pathetic creature, and the book itself. Those cheesy Frankenstein Halloween masks and costumes somehow make for a cruel metaphor of Mary's wounded identity. And it's only beginning in the 1970s has her work been assessed as important to our literary canon. Its analysis continues to broaden. Of late, feminine scholarship analyzes Frankenstein through the lens of gender roles and the female experience. And here's a believe it or not influence. Cindy, am I doing okay on time?
Fine, you've got some time. Remember, we started after, I mean, we have to factor in the introduction.
Anyone falling asleep on us, I would feel horrible. Okay. Prior to the book, Mary had traveled on the Rhine and she saw Frankenstein's castle, where it is said that in the late 1600s, a famous alchemist by the last name of Dippel lived, and he carried out anatomical experiments, creating something called Dippel's oil, the elixir of life. It kind of reminds me of St. Augustine and the Fountain of Youth. And this is actually very a la St. Augustine, Florida, because this kind of story is more for tourism than academic types of scholarship. I couldn't find anything legit to back it up. Our book is written during the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, a time devoted to explaining the how and why of our existence through an empirical lens, through the scientific method. Prior, explanations for life seemed pretty straightforward. God was in charge. But new biological, electrical, and medical discoveries, as Thomas Eakins' painting captures, was a threat to the norms of religious and mythical beliefs. The Romantic movement is the reaction to this scary world. Doesn't this sound a little familiar today? Think about the scientific and technological breakthroughs of late. My God, we just landed the Mars rover on Mars again. We can yell, "Hey Siri," and beckon the world. Lifelike holograms recount history. We have a COVID vaccine. These creations in a vacuum are gorgeous. These are beautiful gems of scientific discovery. Our brains at its best. And yet these are ethically neutral. We are the stewards of their impact. And going back to Victor's Prometheus perpetual ambition, what have we learned about caring for our creations? Our book is told in an epistolary format, taking place, or I should say gestating, over 9 months, and opens in what seems in a very radical locale, but it's not radical, it's not random. Robert Walton, a ship captain, he's writing to his sister while at sea. He is stuck in the frozen Arctic waters. He tells Mary Seville, notice the initials, that his crew has just rescued this man from the icy, freezy waters. Robert listens to this shivering, delirious tale, and he's struck by the common bond that these two strangers share. I just realized it kind of reminds me of Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. But anyway, I don't know where that came from. Okay, Robert, we learn, is at a crossroads. His mutinous crew is ready to revolt. He must make a decision, pursue his goal of becoming a famous explorer, gaining worldwide glory, and finding the Northwest Passage, or turn back to England with a failed mission. After hearing Victor's story, what does Robert do? Is Victor's appearance on his ship some kind of sign? Like Prometheus, is his ambition regenerative? This latest invention of the Burberry shirt is a perfect example of blind ambition fashion gone amok. Even this past Sunday's New York Times, as Cindy said, agrees that Frankenstein is a metaphor of our current times. The book makes us question humankind's responsibility as a result of our achievements, our creations, and our circumstances. Someone on their editorial desk must have known we'd be talking about this book, because who else is featured all over the pages this past Sunday but our Mary? Why, in February of 2021, in the throes of COVID, political upheaval, general crazy, would you want to read or have any interest in Frankenstein at all? Because ambition must be measured. Ambition can injure. The book warns us to beware of the obsession of the self, because the latter can lead to a monstrous ending. Thank you.
Oh, that was wonderful, Stacey. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to go ahead, Cindy, and just pop on our next slide that, that
Okay.
shows what we'll be reading next. But we do have a question, Cindy, about the Rubens, and I know that you love that image.
I love Rubens so much. What was the question?
Is this the same artist from the Cummers collection? Does the Cummer have a Rubens?
They have a small Rubens. It used to be, the attribution was in question. So I wonder if any of the Cummer ladies could answer that. Is Helen still around?
I don't know.
Because it was attributed to Rubens, 30 something years ago, but I think there was some question about it. But yes, I mean, it's a style of Rubens. With that's probably the best I can answer.
Is there anything are you having any type of esprit d'escalar, anything you wanted to say but couldn't say and would like to add now?
No, I mean, I think we covered everything. It just went by so fast.
I know it really did. And I feel like no one else is here, but evidently people are here.
Did you mention the books for the next 3?
Oh yes, so we have, thank you, Cindy. So next month we will read The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. And then in April, we'll be doing The Book Thieves, which is right here. And accompanying The Book Thieves, we have a beautiful book called Memory Unearthed. And these are the Loge Ghetto photographs of Heinrich Ross. This is a fabulous book. And of course, we'll be doing these for Holocaust remembrance. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we will be reading Middlemarch in May.
And this book, I got to choose one book for a change, and this was the book. I'll take responsibility for choosing this book. So
yes, she's taking responsibility. No worries at all. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I hope that's okay. And then we can just see one another.
I hadn't been able to see myself. I don't know how to work these things work. Anyway.
But we appreciate everyone that has attended. I hope that you've learned something and you've enjoyed it. And we really look forward to having you join us for drinks in person in the garden. I can't think of anything more fabulous, really.
No, really. And we thank the Cummers so much for giving us this platform to share what we love.
Absolutely. And we love all of you also for attending. It really means a lot, but we really look forward to interacting with you in person sometime soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey.